Shirley slammed the confiscation notice on my porch table, smiling like she'd won a war I didn't know we were fighting. "Your firearms are a violation," she said, clutching a clipboard like a queen holding a scepter. I stared at her. Calm. Because storms like Shirley never scared me. I'd handled worse in 20 years on patrol. "You do know I'm not even in your HO, right?" I asked. Her smile flickered, just for a second. That flicker was the first crack in her armor. I'd spend the next few months prying it wide open. "My name is Daniel Reyes. Retired detective. 12 years narcotics. 8 years homicide. I moved to Maple Crest for quiet. I bought the corner lot on Birchwood Lane specifically because the listing said, not HOA governed. I checked twice. Shirley Doyle ran the Maple Crest Estates HOA like a personal fiefdom, 3 streets over from my actual property line. She'd been president for 11 years, unopposed, because nobody wanted the migraines that came with challenging her. I didn't know her name yet. I just knew someone had been leaving notices on my mailbox for weeks. The first one was about unapproved paint color. My house was beige. It had always been beige. The second note complained about grass height, stapled with a smiley face sticker like that softened the threat underneath. I ignored both. I wasn't in her jurisdiction. I figured it was a mistake that would fix itself. It didn't fix itself. Nothing with Shirley ever fixed itself. It only escalated, quietly, like a fire under floorboards. My neighbor Tom warned me over the fence. "That's Karen Doyle. She thinks the whole subdivision answers to her." "I'm not in her subdivision," I said. Tom just laughed, dry and tired. "Tell her that." Good luck. 2 weeks later, my trash cans mysteriously got flagged for being visible from the street on Tuesdays. I still wasn't part of the HOA. I checked my deed again. Not one clause tied me to Maple Crest Estates. Then came the letter demanding a $250 community beautification fine, addressed to me by name, threatening legal action. I called the number on the letterhead. Shirley answered herself. "This is a mistake," I told her plainly. "No mistake, Mr. Reyes. Your property borders our community. That makes you subject to our covenants," she said. "Smut," I explained, calmly. "That proximity isn't jurisdiction." She hung up on me mid-sentence. That was twist number 1. Because Shirley didn't hang up on people who complied. She hung up on people she couldn't control, and that scared her. I let it go for a week. Then my garage got inspected while I was at the store. Door left ajar. Inside my garage was my gun safe. Locked. Legal. Registered. When I got home, the safe door was open. Every firearm was gone. In its place, a yellow HOA notice of removal for community safety compliance. My hands went cold. Not fear, fury. 20 years of trusting a badge. And someone had stolen my legally owned guns. I called the actual county sheriff's department. My old partner, Mike Alvarez, picked up before the second ring. "Mike, I need a favor. Someone broke into my garage and stole my firearms under HO authority." Silence. Then, what? Mike drove out himself. He'd retired 2 years before me. Still had connections in every division that mattered. We found the authorization. Shirley had hired a private compliance contractor, a guy named Curtis with 0 legal standing to enter property. Curtis had a key from a previous tenant who'd sold the house to me. Nobody canceled his access. Twist number 2. Mike's jaw tightened. "This isn't a civil HOA dispute anymore, Daniel. This is burglary and theft of firearms. Federal adjacent." I filed a police report that night. Shirley, when contacted, insisted the guns were safely stored at HOA headquarters for compliance review. Compliance review for a man who wasn't even a member. I almost laughed. Almost. Mostly I just wanted my guns back. The next morning, I drove to the so-called HOA headquarters, a converted garage behind Shirley's own house. She wouldn't let me in. "Board policy," she said, arms crossed, blocking her own doorway like a human barricade. I told her I was a retired detective. Her eyes narrowed. Calculating, like she was recalculating her odds in real time. "That doesn't change anything," she said. But her voice cracked slightly. That crack would matter later. I filed it away. I left without my guns that day. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I left with a plan. That night, I started a file. Every notice, every call, every date, every name. Detectives don't forget how to build a case. My daughter Mia, 22, home for the summer, watched me organize folders at 1 a.m. Dad, this is insane. This is discovery, I told her. Every tyrant leaves paperwork. Shirley just doesn't know I read paperwork for a living. Mia laughed. But she also started helping, cross-referencing HOA bylaws she found buried on a defunct community website. We found something strange. Maple Crest Estates HOA hadn't filed its annual corporate renewal with the state in 6 years. Twist number 3, technically, the HOA's corporate status had lapsed. It existed as an entity in name only. If the HOA wasn't legally incorporated, its board had no legal authority to fine, fence, or seize anything from anyone. I sat with that fact for a long moment. Not to gloat. To plan the exact right moment to use it. The following week, 3 more residents mentioned similar compliance visits from Curtis, always when homeowners weren't there. One neighbor, Priya, said her deck furniture was confiscated for being an eyesore, never returned, never itemized. Another, an elderly man named Walt, had his generator seized during a heat wave. He'd needed it for his oxygen machine. Walt's story hit hardest. That wasn't governance. That was cruelty wearing a clipboard and a lanyard. I visited Walt personally. He was shaking, embarrassed, apologizing for making a fuss. Nobody should apologize for wanting to breathe. That night I decided, this wasn't just about my guns anymore. Shirley had built an empire on other people's silence. I requested official HOA meeting minutes through public records, since the entity had lapsed. Some records became publicly reachable. Shirley found out I'd requested records. She showed up at my house unannounced, all smiles, offering to resolve this quietly. Return my property, cancel every fine issued to non-members, and we're done, I said. She refused, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. Twist number 4, she offered me a private settlement, cash, no questions, if I dropped everything and stayed silent. A bribe. From an HOA president. I recorded the entire conversation. Legally, one-party consent state. She didn't know that. I smiled and told her I'd think about it. She left satisfied. I'd just gotten the best evidence of the whole case. 2 weeks passed in eerie calm. Shirley stopped sending notices. Neighbors whispered she was regrouping. I used the quiet to build my case properly, filing complaints with the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Mike helped me file a formal police report categorizing the gun seizure as grand theft and unlawful entry. Mia dug deeper into HOA financial records and found irregular deposits. HOA dues routed into a personal Venmo account. Twist number 5, Shirley had been pocketing fines for years, calling it a community reserve fund she alone controlled. Walt's generator turned up, in Curtis's truck bed, being sold on a local marketplace app for $200. I photographed it before Curtis could sell it, called local police, and had it returned to Walt within the hour. Curtis panicked, started talking. Said Shirley told him confiscated items becoming unclaimed property after 30 days was standard. No such bylaw existed. She'd invented it, verbally, and Curtis, uneducated in law, believed her completely. I felt something shift. Curtis wasn't a villain. He was a tool, scared of losing a paycheck, following a false authority. I offered him something Shirley never would, a way out. Testify honestly, and I won't push charges against you. Curtis broke down, agreed, and handed over a notebook, Shirley's handwritten quota list of homes to target monthly. My name was on it. So was Walt's. So was Priya's. Every targeted household happened to be elderly, disabled, or new. The quiet lull ended fast. Shirley must have sensed Curtis flipping, because she suddenly filed a restraining order against me. Claimed I'd harassed and threatened her during our last conversation, the very one I'd recorded, proving otherwise. My lawyer, an old friend from the force named Denise, laughed out loud reading the filing. She just handed us discovery. We submitted the recording as evidence. The judge, unimpressed with the frivolous filing, dismissed it in 11 minutes flat. Shirley left the courthouse red-faced, refusing eye contact. HOA binder clutched to her chest like a shield that had failed. That same week, Priya organized an actual homeowners meeting. One Shirley didn't control, held in the community clubhouse. 43 residents showed up. Most had a Shirley story. Most had stayed silent out of exhaustion, not agreement. I stood up and told them what Curtis confirmed. The HOA had lapsed legally 6 years ago. Every fine was void. Gasp. Someone laughed bitterly. Someone else cried, relieved, saying they'd paid thousands in fines to nobody. Legally, Shirley wasn't there. She was, we later learned, meeting privately with a lawyer, trying to refile HOA paperwork retroactively. Twist number 6. Retroactive incorporation isn't legal. You can't unlapse 6 years of unauthorized authority after the fact. Denise filed a class action inquiry on behalf of every overcharged resident, me included, though my case stood apart. Theft. The DA's office, after reviewing Curtis's notebook and my recorded conversation, opened a formal investigation into Shirley Doyle. Shirley responded publicly with a neighborhood flyer calling me a disgruntled outsider stirring division for personal revenge. Funny thing about flyers, they're public documents too. And mine now included defamation as an added claim. My blood pressure should have been through the roof. Instead I felt strangely calm. The same calm I'd felt on raids. Mia asked if I was scared of losing. I spent 20 years building cases on less evidence than this, I told her. Then came the twist nobody expected. Shirley's own husband, Gerald, called me. Quietly. Nervously. Wanting to talk. We met at a diner outside the subdivision. Gerald looked 10 years older than his photos. Tired eyes. Tired man. She's not well, he said. Not an excuse. But you should know, this isn't the first HOA she's run this way. Twist number 7. Shirley had been removed from a previous HOA presidency 2 states away, for nearly identical conduct. Gerald handed me a folder, old records he'd kept. Maybe out of guilt, maybe self-preservation. I didn't ask which. The old HOA had quietly settled with a resident whose service dog was falsely confiscated as a banned breed violation. Same tactics. Same clipboard. Same smile. Shirley wasn't a rogue actor, she was a repeat offender who'd learned to hide better. I thanked Gerald. He looked relieved, like a weight had finally rolled off a chest that had carried it too long. With this pattern established, Denise argued it strengthened intent. This wasn't confusion about bylaws. It was a deliberate method. The state attorney general's office escalated the case from consumer complaint to active fraud investigation within the week. Shirley, sensing the walls closing in, tried one last maneuver, an emergency HOA vote to ratify all past fines. She scheduled it for 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, hoping low turnout would let her loyalists rubber stamp everything quietly. Priya found out and blasted the neighborhood group chat. 60 people showed up. Shirley hadn't expected 60 people. The vote failed spectacularly, 52-8. Even people who used to defend her stayed silent, arms crossed. Done. Shirley stood at the podium, hands trembling slightly, insisting the vote didn't reflect the community's true feelings. Someone in the back shouted, "It reflects exactly how we feel." Shirley. The room actually laughed. Genuine, tired laughter. I watched her scan the crowd for an ally. She found none. Not even Curtis, who'd quietly slipped out early. That night, my old detective instincts told me something was coming. Shirley wasn't the type to lose without one last move. 2 days later, she filed a lawsuit against me personally, defamation, claiming my false statements damaged her reputation. Denise wasn't worried. She just opened discovery on her own finances to defend a claim she can't win. We subpoenaed HOA bank records as part of my defense. That's when the Venmo trail became formal. Documented evidence. Twist number 8. Shirley had funneled over $38,000 in fines into personal accounts over 4 years, untaxed, unreported. The state fraud investigators, already circling, now had a clean financial trail leading straight to felony territory. Shirley's lawsuit against me effectively became the shovel she used to dig her own legal grave, one motion at a time. Meanwhile, my guns were still sitting somewhere, unaccounted for, in what Shirley now called evidence storage for her lawsuit. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Stolen property? Held hostage? Used as leverage in a lawsuit built on lies. The judge overseeing her defamation suit ordered her, under subpoena, to produce every seized item with documentation. She had none. No documentation meant no legal chain of custody, which meant, under the judge's ruling, immediate return of all property. My firearms came back 4 days later, delivered by county deputies, not Shirley, because Shirley refused to face me directly. I opened the case in my garage, checked each weapon against my registered serials. All accounted for. Untouched. Safe. With my guns home, I thought the fight might finally slow down. It didn't. It sped up. Violently. Unexpectedly. Shirley, cornered financially and legally, did something desperate. She tried to sell her house and disappear before charges landed. A for sale by owner sign appeared on her lawn within 72 hours, listed suspiciously below market value. Denise filed an emergency motion to freeze the property sale pending the fraud investigation and restitution claims from residents. The judge granted it same day. Shirley couldn't move a dollar or a deed until the case resolved. She was stuck. Twist number 9, her real estate agent turned out to be her own sister, listed under a maiden name. The sister had no license in this state, an unlicensed transaction. Adding one more thread to unravel in court. Priya, ever thorough, found the sister's old HOA connection too. She'd been Shirley's compliance officer in the previous state HOA scandal. The family operation was bigger than one woman with a clipboard. It was a small machine built on fear and paperwork. Local news picked up the story after Walt, emotional but articulate, gave an interview about his oxygen generator being stolen. The segment aired statewide. Ex-cop uncovers HOA fraud ring, became the headline nobody in Maple Crest could ignore. Shirley refused every interview request, hiding behind drawn curtains. Her once busy driveway now empty except for one sedan. Meanwhile, more residents came forward, some from other subdivisions Shirley had consulted for over the years. Same tactics repeating. The pattern painted a portrait scarier than any individual complaint. A woman who'd built a career preying on quiet compliance. Curtis, now fully cooperating, testified before the grand jury, describing exact instructions. Target elderly, target new, target isolated. He described a spreadsheet, an actual predatory algorithm scrawled in a notebook, ranking homeowners by resistance likelihood. My name had been marked low resistance, relocated, assume compliant. Shirley never guessed I'd once put people like her behind bars. That miscalculation, more than any single act, felt like the twist that sealed her fate. She misjudged the wrong man. Denise and the DA's office coordinated. Criminal charges for grand theft, fraud, unlicensed real estate activity, and extortion attempt. A civil suit followed close behind, representing 41 homeowners seeking restitution for years of unlawful, invalid HOA fines. I sat in on the initial hearing, not as plaintiff alone, but as the man who'd cracked the first thread loose. Shirley appeared thinner, paler, without her signature blazer, without her clipboard. Just a woman facing consequences at last. Her lawyer tried a plea deal, restitution in exchange for dropped criminal charges. The citing pattern and scale, refused. This isn't a first offense, the prosecutor said plainly. This is a career built on exploiting people who trusted a system. Gerald, her husband, filed for divorce the same week, citing irreconcilable differences that had clearly been building for years. He testified, reluctantly but honestly, confirming the pattern from the previous state HOA scandal under oath. Twist number 10. Gerald revealed Shirley had actually forged his signature on several HOA financial documents over the years. That meant Gerald was, legally, another victim, not an accomplice. It reshaped the entire framing of the case's family angle. The courtroom went quiet during that testimony. Even Shirley, stone-faced through most proceedings, finally looked away, ashamed. I almost felt something like pity. Almost. Then I remembered Walt's trembling hands and the missing oxygen machine. Pity has limits. Accountability doesn't. I let the feeling pass and stayed focused on what justice actually required here. The trial moved fast once evidence stacked up. Recordings, financial trails, Curtis's testimony, Gerald's forged documents. The quota notebook. Shirley's defense crumbled attempt by attempt. Her lawyer eventually requested a continuance just to reassess strategy. Judge denied it. On the stand herself, Shirley tried the sympathy angle, talked about protecting property values, community standards, just doing her job. The prosecutor asked one simple question: which bylaw authorized entering a non-member's private garage to seize firearms? Silence. Long, damning silence. Because there was no bylaw. There never had been. Just a woman who assumed nobody would check. That silence, more than any single piece of evidence, felt like the moment the entire courtroom understood the truth completely. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Not because the case was complicated, because they wanted to be absolutely certain. When the verdict came back guilty on all major counts, the courtroom didn't erupt. It exhaled, quiet, exhausted, relieved. Walt cried. Priya hugged strangers. I just sat still, feeling something settle in my chest that had been tense for months. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In that gap, the civil case moved forward at a faster pace. 41 households, myself included, filed for restitution covering years of illegally collected fines and stolen or damaged property. The frozen house sale finally proceeded, but under court order. Funds went directly into an escrow for victim restitution. Twist number 11? The smaller kind. The house sold for less than expected because word had spread about its history. Nobody wanted to buy the Karen house, as neighborhood kids had started calling it. Half joking, half serious, entirely accurate. Curtis, cooperating fully, avoided jail time. Sentenced instead to probation and mandatory restitution for items he'd personally sold. He apologized to Walt directly, in person, awkward and sincere, returning what money he could from the generator sale. Walt, gracious in a way I found humbling, told him, just don't let anyone talk you into being cruel again. That line stuck with me more than almost anything else in the whole ordeal. Cruelty needs permission. Curtis had given his. The sentencing hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, courtroom packed with residents who'd waited years for this moment. Shirley, dressed plainly now, no blazer, no clipboard, no crowd of intimidated homeowners, stood small before the judge. The judge cited a sustained pattern of predatory conduct targeting vulnerable residents through fabricated authority in the sentencing statement. For years, with restitution obligations extending well beyond release, plus a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board nationwide. That last part mattered most to residents in the room. Shirley Doyle would never again hold a clipboard over anyone. She didn't look at the crowd as deputies led her out. Maybe shame. Maybe disbelief. Maybe just exhaustion. Finally, completely. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Walt spoke first. Calm and steady, justice doesn't fix everything. But it means something. Priya spoke next, thanking the community for finally speaking up together instead of enduring silently, one household at a time. When they turned to me, I kept it simple. I spent my career protecting people from exactly this kind of abuse. Turns out retirement didn't change the job description much. Just the paperwork. A few reporters actually laughed at that. That evening, the neighborhood held an impromptu gathering at the clubhouse, the same room where the failed vote happened. No agenda. No clipboard, no fines. Just food, relief, and 40-some families realizing they'd survived something together. Finally over. Mia found me on the porch afterward, quiet for once. You really weren't even part of their HOA this whole time. Nope, I said, smiling. Guess she should have checked property lines before checking my garage. Mia laughed harder than she had in weeks. Gerald, divorced now, stayed in Maple Crest, quietly rebuilding a life that had been overshadowed for years by his wife's schemes. He thanked me once, briefly, awkwardly, at the mailbox. You didn't just save your own guns. You saved a lot of us. I didn't need thanks, but I took it, because sometimes acknowledgement is the only closure people can offer each other. The HOA itself, stripped of legitimacy and leadership, formally dissolved within the month. Its fines voided, its records sealed for audit. Residents who'd been overcharged for years began receiving restitution checks, small individually, but symbolically enormous for people long ignored. Walt used part of his to buy a backup generator. A legal one. One nobody could ever seize under false pretense again. Priya organized a genuinely voluntary neighborhood beautification fund. No fines. No threats. Just people choosing to contribute freely. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. Community, it turned out, worked better without someone weaponizing the word against its own people. I kept my case files. Every folder, every recording, filed away in a drawer labeled simply, "Never Again." Some nights I still thought about how close it came, how easily Shirley might have gotten away with it entirely. If Curtis hadn't panicked. If Gerald hadn't spoken up. If Walt had stayed too proud to ask for help. Justice, I learned again, rarely arrives alone. It takes a dozen small, brave decisions stacking quietly before it ever shows up. Months passed. The subdivision slowly returned to something like normal, quieter, calmer, without the constant hum of anxious compliance. New residents moved in, unaware of the history, seeing only a peaceful neighborhood with genuinely friendly, unguarded neighbors. Occasionally someone would mention the Karen incident, like local folklore, half legend, half cautionary tale for anyone tempted toward power tripping. I never sought out the spotlight after the case closed. I just wanted my garage quiet and my guns exactly where I left them. But every so often, a stranger from another neighborhood would find my number, asking, "How do I fight my own HOA?" I always gave the same advice: document everything, know your actual jurisdiction, and never assume authority just because someone acts like they have it. Because that's what Shirley's entire empire was built on: assumption, intimidation, and the quiet hope that nobody would ever check. I checked. That was the whole story, really. One retired detective who simply refused to stop asking questions. Denise eventually became something of a local legend herself, taking on 3 more HOA fraud cases within the following year. Each case, smaller in scale, still echoed the same core lesson: unchecked power in small rooms grows dangerous fast. Curtis, oddly enough, went back to school, studying paralegal work. Said he wanted to understand the laws he'd once ignored. I ran into him at a diner once. He looked lighter, like guilt had finally started loosening its grip on him. "I'm sorry," he said again, unprompted. "I know," I told him. "Just make sure it means something going forward." Walt passed peacefully 18 months later. Natural causes, generator humming quietly in the background, exactly as it should have been. At his small memorial, Priya read a short statement about neighbors who show up when it actually matters most. I thought about the quota notebook. Walt's name marked in Shirley's cramped handwriting. Low resistance, elderly, target first. She'd been wrong about him too. Walt hadn't been weak. He'd just been waiting for someone willing to stand beside him. The subdivision eventually renamed its community fund, the Walt Initiative, a quiet, permanent rebuke to everything Shirley once stood for. Mia went on to study law herself the following fall, citing this entire ordeal as the reason she chose the path. "Watching you build that case," she told me, "made me realize paperwork can actually be a weapon for good, too." I laughed at that, thinking back to the clipboard Shirley once wielded like a badge of unearned authority over strangers. Funny how the same tool, documentation, procedure, paperwork, could be either a weapon of oppression or a shield for justice. It depended entirely on who held it, and why, and whether they were willing to be held accountable themselves. Gerald eventually moved out of state, starting over somewhere quieter, sending Christmas cards each year with simple, grateful notes. Shirley, from prison, wrote me one letter. I never opened it. Some doors, once closed properly, don't need reopening. I gave the letter to Denise instead, in case it held anything relevant to the ongoing restitution proceedings. It didn't. It was, apparently, 3 pages insisting she'd only ever wanted order for the community. Denise read it aloud once, laughing bitterly. "Order," she said, "built on theft, forgery, and fear. That's not order. That's just tyranny with a homeowner's newsletter." I couldn't have said it better myself. Honestly. Some people mistake control for order until the illusion finally collapses entirely. 2 years after the trial, Maple Crest Estates HOA didn't exist anymore. Not even in name. Just a normal street now. My corner lot on Birchwood Lane remained exactly what it always legally was. Mine? Ungoverned? Quiet. Finally undisturbed for good. Sometimes new neighbors ask why I keep an old folder labeled, "Never Again" in my office drawer. Untouched but preserved. Old case file, I usually say. From back when a clipboard almost outranked the law around here. They usually laugh. They don't always understand the whole story. That's fine. Some stories are better lived quietly than retold constantly for effect. But if anyone in Maple Crest ever tries building an empire out of fear and fine print again, they'll remember. They'll remember Shirley Doyle. Her empty driveway. Her forged signatures. Her stolen generator. Her cell number that never got answered again. They'll remember that authority isn't a clipboard. It isn't a title. It isn't a smile backed by nothing but bluff. It's accountability, transparency, and the willingness to be checked by the very rules you claim to enforce on others. Shirley never understood that distinction. Not once. Not even facing a judge. Not even losing everything she'd built on lies. I did understand it, though. 20 years of carrying a badge taught me that real authority earns trust, never demands it. That's the whole lesson buried under 200-something days of fines, threats, stolen firearms, and one very persistent retired detective. Power without accountability always finds its ceiling eventually. Sometimes it just takes one person refusing to look away first. I still keep my guns locked properly, registered properly, exactly as the law requires. No HOA needed to enforce that. Because in the end, I never broke a single rule. Shirley broke every rule imaginable, hiding behind a rulebook she invented. And that, more than any twist or trial, is the story worth remembering. The truth always outlasts the paperwork built to bury it.